Guys, I have Coach Michael Bann with me. He's either at the Scottsdale Quarter right now, or he's got a visual green screen behind him with Matt Springer's favorite place in the world, Menchie's Yogurt. So Matt Springer, if you watch this, shout out to you, my friend. But we are going to talk today about first responders. This is a topic near and dear to Michael Bann's heart, and he's worked with a lot of them over the years. So a lot of people have been asking him and Big Dogs a lot of questions about, well, how can we be more productive, successful, and also build longevity in our careers? So I wanted to bring Michael on to talk about some of those KPIs, the key performance indicators, and how those lead to somebody being more capable in this role. So Michael, thanks for coming on, man. And can you do me a favor, can you define, just for everybody, so that we're on the same page, what does first responder mean to you?
First responder would just be a individual who would be the first to respond to a 911 call. So I would lump police into this as well. So you call 911 and your house is on fire. So you're going to have fire show up, you'll have paramedics show up, EMT show up, you might even have police show up. So first responders are people who will be the first to respond to an emergency situation. So whether it's a terrorist attack and a bombing, or if it's just a heart attack of a person that happens to be obese, and they got to deadlift them up or whatever. So it's basically whomever responds first to an emergency.
Okay. And when you think about that role, what are some of the outcomes that need to be created? So you mentioned deadlifting somebody who has a heart attack. What are some of the things that you look for them to be able to do?
In terms of like fitness KPIs, key performance indicators?
I more meant just the outcomes. Like, what would you suspect they will need to be able to do? So offline, you mentioned that they might need to go in behind SWAT and pull people out. So what are the outcomes that they'll have to do?
Yeah, so you might have tactical EMS, so paramedics and EMTs that might have to go in behind SWAT if there's like some form of a shootout or a hostage situation. They got to go in and get the person out that's been shot or whatever. So could be that. They might have to run into a burning building and pull people out. They might have to just deadlift an obese human, and 300. That is the most crazy car. Sorry if you heard that. Wow. So you might have to just deadlift a very obese human, a 400-pound, human that just had a heart attack. So you don't really have a typical, like, this is what I do all the time. But you do have to be ready for pretty much anything. Even
Go ahead. Okay. So you got to be comprehensively capable, essentially, is what you're saying.
Yeah, and you have to be able to maintain mental acuity under high stress scenarios. So if you can't focus or concentrate, or if you can't, maintain a level of poise under duress, you probably aren't going to be very successful long-term in a career field like that.
Okay, so I know that we're going to talk about fitness KPIs and also some nutrition KPIs and how those kind of correlate and work with one another. But if you think about the fitness side of things, how would you give context to a first responder? Meaning, like, what would you say to them right up front? That's like, your fitness needs to be blank. Like, what would you say to that person initially?
Your fitness needs to be adaptable.
Okay. And now from that, walk me through some of the KPIs that you generally work with your first responders on.
Yeah. So generally speaking, I look at conditioning. So we'll look at just various forms of conditioning tests, whether it's rowing, running, the assault bike, the bike erg, even swimming, because I do have some rescue divers that I work with, so they have to be able to swim. We'll look at strength, right? We'll look at deadlift, back squat, front squat, bench press, close grip, bench press, strict press, push press. If they enjoy the movements and they have technical proficiency, we'll look at, the power clean, the power snatch, and basically compare all those numbers and kind of see, hey, this person is a little bit faster than they are strong. So, based on these numbers, we might need to work a little bit more on strength, or this person is wicked strong and they're not very fast. So we got to work on some speed. We'll look at mixed modal stuff. So I'll look at, burpees, kettlebell swings, and, just mixing it together, box jumps and things like that. I'll also look just generally at what I would probably call like, I guess you just call it rucking, but like loaded walks. Because I don't necessarily want like my paramedics to go for like some 12-mile ruck with a 55-pound pack. But, can you put 35 pounds into a backpack and just go walk, 5 miles? So looking at some loaded walks as well. And if they are going to have to ruck for what they do, like I actually have a wildland firefighter who does actually have to do that. So I have KPIs on rucking. I want to see that you can go and ruck 12 miles, 55 pounds. I want to see you can do it in 2:15 or less. So those are some KPIs I would look at for people that have to do that. And lastly, if you have some form of like requirement for your department, like a selection or whatever, that specific requirement, I'm obviously going to keep as a KPI. So if you have to run 1.5 miles in X amount of time, then that's obviously a KPI that I'm going to look towards as well.
Okay, so I heard kind of some bigger principles there. So you said conditioning, strength, speed, and/or power. Specific KPIs around, let's just call it the framework of what their job requires, and then specifics to passing tests or passing selection. So walk me through conditioning. So you said there's a lot of different implements, which I can understand because they need to be adaptable, like you said. What might some of those conditioning tests look like specifically?
1 mile run, 2 mile run, 1.5 mile run, 5 mile run, 3 mile run, 10K row, 2K row, 5K row, sometimes a 500-meter row, but I don't typically see a need for that. I'll also look at longer distance rucks when needed, looking at swims. Also, for those who have to swim, like rescue divers, I'll be looking at CO2 tolerance. So I'll look at, can you swim 300 meters, taking only one breath every 8 strokes? If you cannot, that's something we might have to work on because there's a level of CO2 tolerance that you have to be successful. So those are some of the basic KPIs that I'll look at.
Okay. Why, and no need to go into specific tests, but why choose the lengths that you chose? Is that based on data that you have seen in the past? Is that based on the length of time that they might need to be highly engaged in a response? Where does that come from?
Yeah, a lot of it actually has to do with just data. Having looked at probably 50,000 data points that I have on like a 3 mile run or like a 5K run. I've been able to tabulate just and graph out where people should sit. Um, so data really is the driver there. Like a 2.5 mile run, I don't have any data on like where somebody should sit there. So I just don't test a 2.5 mile run. But the 3 mile run, I've tested that tens of thousands of times over the last, decade or so of my career with my clients. So I just kind of know like, hey, you ran 3 miles in 20 minutes. That's not very good. Let's break that down. Why did you run in 24? Was it your legs? Was it your lungs? Did you have just terrible technique? Did your calves blow up? Breaking down that test and saying, what are the components of that test? Okay, now let's go from there. So it's really
So,
just data driven.
gotcha. And so that's what I was most curious about. So you're looking at not just the time of the test, you're then breaking it down and saying what cost you a better time. And that is what you then put into training because that's going to reflect how they're able to do their jobs. Is that right?
Yeah. So for example, like the 5K run, I have 57,000 data points. And I can tell you that you should be, in order to be in the top 5% for men, 1958 is the goal. So if I'm looking at that, I'm saying, okay, like you're in the top 30%. Now I'll ask you, hey, what happened? How did you feel? What did you experience? What was going on? What was in your head? And we break it down into basically the fatigue elements. So for some, they're like, man, my shin lights up and I get horrible shin splints. Ah, got it. You actually have a neurodynamics issue and we need to work on the peripheral nervous system to alleviate that. So now you can run faster and more efficiently. Or for others, man, dude, I feel like a fish out of water. I've got this guppy breath. And it's like, all right, we need to work on respiration. So maybe we throw you into a pool and train you to breathe better, etc. So it's no different really in terms of principles when you're looking at movement patterns. I look at somebody's squat. That's the squat. What are the components of the squat? ankle dorsiflexion, knee flexion, hip flexion, lumbar extension, thoracic extension. Let's start breaking that down and seeing where the weak links are. Let's isolate that in training, train it, retest it in 4 to 6 weeks, course correct from there.
And are you picking, whether it be strength or power or endurance, etc., are you picking the tests because you have seen them translate into people being more effective on the job? Is that safe to say, or?
Yeah, it is. It's also not safe to say. So
Okay.
I've got folks that can run 35-minute 5 miles, and I've got folks that can run 32-minute 5 miles. And I can tell you that they both do very well at their job. I've also sat in a room full of, very, very, very elite people, and some of them don't even go to the gym. And I'll ask, like, hey, how good is this guy? And they're like, he's one of our best. You don't work out? No, I hate the gym. I'd rather just do my job as my trainer. So I can't say beyond a shadow of a doubt that like these KPIs guarantee performance, but I can say that if you can't at least hit this number, then we're probably going to have issues down the road. But I don't need you to be at 32, which is why I tell people, like, let's just try to be in like the top 10 to 5% of my data, because that's typically good enough. I don't need you to be in the top 1%. But if you're running a 47-minute 5 mile and you're a firefighter, okay, that is like a big red flag. We have to work on that. But if you cannot run it in 32, that's probably not going to limit your performance.
Would you suspect that specific outlier of the person who doesn't like to go to the gym and still is a high performer, would you suspect that if you did test them, their scores would be pretty good? Like maybe not the best, but would you suspect pretty good?
I have tested them, and their
Okay.
scores were really good, which is
Okay.
why I still think like some of those KPIs can be pretty indicative of performance. But you're never going to run 5 miles as a firefighter. Like you're not going to just go run 5 miles on scene, and you're never going to run 5 miles as a paramedic, even if you're a tactical paramedic. Like it's never going to happen. What I'm looking for there is I'm looking for capacity, because capacity is the base of the fitness pyramid. And you can only peak a pyramid as high as the base is wide. So if I have a very small base and I try to have a very high peak, it's going to topple over. So I need to have that big, big, big base because I can get a massive peak. So I'm looking at these capacity tests to see like, hey, what's the potential for a peak right now? Because if you have a 47-minute 5 mile, you probably aren't going to have a good 1 mile.
Yeah, that's
so
fair.
If I can, and every time I've tested somebody that's got a sub 6 minute 1 mile run, no, sub 6 doesn't mean world class. A 5:45 mile is not Olympic quality, but they generally actually have a very, very good 5 mile. So capacity is always the first thing I look at, because I need to see, can you recover? A 5 mile time trial, if you can do it in about 35, tells me you can almost guaranteed run into a building, take care of business, run out of oxygen, run outside, get new oxygen, run back inside and recover. So I'm looking at your capacity to also recover, which is really where I'm most concerned, because very rarely in a first responder situation are you just going to do something for, just 2 to 3 minutes and then call it a day. And even then, you have to like respond to the call, go back to the station, and then an hour later, crap, got another call, let's go. So it's, first responders, they don't work just one shift or one call per shift. They could have dozens of calls over a 48-hour window, depending on their shift schedule. So capacity is huge for that.
Okay, before we go to nutrition, for somebody who is a first responder or wanting to become a first responder and isn't working with you yet, what are some of the things that you would say, hey, go test this and get extremely aware of where your limitations are? Like if you could give them 3 to 5 fitness tests, what would you want them to do?
I'd want to see a mock powerlifting meet. So back squat, deadlift, bench press, back squat, bench press, deadlift. So I can compare those numbers. And then I also want to see 5 mile and 2 mile and 1,200 meter.
Runs, I assume.
Yeah. Because if I could, I'd want to see rowing tests, but rowing isn't as specific to a first responder as running. So 1,200-meter run, I've tested that countless times, and that is a very, very good test for kind of determining potential 5 mile. I know there are some people out there that have correlated quite well with 5 mile performance. So I like the 1,200-meter run because that's a pretty painful test. It
Mm-hmm.
hurts. I also like the 1 mile, I'm sorry, the 2 mile run. And I get that from pretty much all of my special forces folks, like my SFAS guys. So I like the 2 mile because there's like that middle ground of like, well, it's not just 6 minutes of pain, but it's like you also can't jog it. So it's just that middle ground of like, oh, this just sucks. And then the 5 mile is something I really like for overall capacity. So I would look at 3 different runs, 3 different barbell movements. And if you give me that data, I could probably figure out 12 months of what you need fitness wise just from those 6 data points.
Gotcha. Okay, that's awesome. Let's transition into nutrition, and then as we go, I know that you'll correlate, nutrition and fitness back to one another. So walk us through how you sort of define what a nutrition KPI should even be. Like what should it even help them understand?
Yeah, there's a street cleaner, so I
It's
apologize.
all good, man.
So when I think of nutrition, I think of subjective and quantitative, things. So objective and subjective. I think one, with nutrition, you should be able to maintain mental acuity. So that's a big part, right? Like if you eat food and 60 minutes later, you're just needing a nap, something isn't right. Now, we don't have numbers to define that, but that's just like a feeling, right? Also, it's got to be something that allows you to feel happy about it. So if you really are a foodie, then the bodybuilding macros and Tupperware might not be a very fulfilling approach. So I want to make sure that one, it's fulfilling. You can actually do that and not feel emotionally taxed by doing it. And then two, I want to make sure that you maintain good mental acuity. In terms of actual like KPIs I can test and look at, there's 5 things more or less that I want to make sure we're good on. I want to make sure we got good glucose tolerance. So that's, lab work really. Gut health, obviously lab work there. I want to make sure that we have great oxygen delivery. And I want to make sure that we have really, really, really good circadian biology. So if you're eating at, let's say, 9 p.m. and you're going to bed at 10, that might actually mess up your circadian biology. So I want to make sure that it's not screwing up sleep, etc. And I also want to look at hormones. And we know now that if you're low carb, high intensity, high volume, you're probably going to end up with some endocrinology issues. And we see that in CrossFit, right? Like back, way, way back then. CrossFit is much smarter about that now, but it was the old school, like, hey, paleo, low carb, broccoli and chicken. Now let's go do a WOD. And we saw hormones tank, we saw thyroid tank, we saw the adrenal glands just fatigue. And we know that it's not technically adrenal fatigue, but
Yeah.
the brain is basically shutting down there. So, I want to make sure that we have good endocrinology there as well. And then from there, I would also probably put forth the argument that we don't inherently want to be the leanest people. And we usually associate like lean and jacked with super fit. What I have seen, somewhere in that 12-ish to 14-ish percent body fat seems to be a pretty solid body fat percentage for performance and resiliency in a first responder world. So
I assume you mean male.
Yeah,
Okay.
male.
Yeah.
With females, it seems to be a little bit, obviously it's higher than that.
Yeah.
I don't actually have enough data points to be very certain about females because I've had some at 15 and they do great and they're super healthy and they have normal menstrual cycles. And then I've seen some at 22 with the same thing. So I don't have as much data to be concrete about females. With women that are first responders, like I actually have a woman who is a tactical paramedic. I look for good menstrual cycles. So I'm looking to say, hey, like, do we have a menstrual cycle? Is it 37 days or is it 22 days? What is it? Ideally, it's 29 days. And then I'm looking to see, hey, do we have cravings? Do we have cramps? Do we have bloating? Do we have any like negative things that come with your typical period? So with women, I'm looking at that as a KPI as well. And ideally, when I get my women and we really dial in their food and we take care of their training and their sleep and all that, they'll usually report back like, oh, hey, I have my period, but I don't have any cramps, no emotional stuff. I'm not, craving food or whatever. Okay, my period's done. And that's it. It's super simple. It's like, all right, I had a period and now it's done. And that's what I look for with my women.
Okay. Are you saying that when you do lab work, when you understand oxygen delivery, endocrine system, etc., hormones, those numbers give you sort of the map of, okay, this person is where they need to be. If those numbers aren't there, then you put a different version of nutrition and lifestyle into the training regimen to get those numbers where you want to be. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so let's look at men, for example. Men typically have higher iron levels. We typically eat more red meat as like a society, especially in a typically more masculine dominated society of first responders, steaks and beef and hamburgers. So men oftentimes might have excessive iron. So their nutritional change, let's take some red meat out of the diet. Let's maybe not eat as much iron, and let's maybe do a little bit more chicken or white meat or less red meat, and or maybe more wild caught fattier fish like a salmon. Whereas women, sometimes, one, they bleed every month, so sometimes they're lower on iron. They also sometimes just don't eat as much red meat from like a cultural society perspective. And not saying all, but just broad spectrum here. So I might actually recommend, hey, let's get some more red meat in our diet. Let's get some more spinach in our diet. Let's get some more iron containing vegetables in our diet or whatever. And honestly, I'd rather have heme iron from red meat a little bit better than a vegetable iron. It's just not as usable. Plus, with the way that first responders typically digest foods, they typically have a really hard time getting in those things anyway because their digestion is super, super messed up. And they don't even realize it because they're just living with it. It's kind of like living with a 20-pound backpack. You don't even realize it until you take it off. And then you're like, whoa, I'm light now.
Why,
So
why, um, why might they have those digestion issues?
So digestion is actually a really, really tied in thing with the nervous system. So you have fight or flight, rest and digest. If your entire job's purpose is to be sleep deprived 3 or 4 days a week, you're not really going to get into rest and digest. You're going to be on that fight or flight mode all the time. So your pancreas won't be as um, keen to digest. Oftentimes they're eating fast because it's like, hey, I got to eat lunch, but I have no idea if I'm going to have a call here. So I just eat fast. So not chewing your food, not sleeping, those kind of things. And then on top of that, a lot of the times the food that you eat at station isn't paleo whole 30 approved. So sometimes it's just not healthy food. So
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of factors that go into that. And some stations are great. I've worked with firefighters who like that the entire station is, whole foods, lots of vegetables, organic meats, and they all pitch in for it. And some, it's like, nah, bro, we do DoorDash or Uber Eats, So it's a cultural thing, and it depends on each station. But by far and large, because of sleep deprivation, usually their digestion's pretty messed up, which goes into circadian biology and figuring out how to like partition and not partition, sorry, periodize their macros.
Okay. When, gosh, we could do 50 episodes, I think, on this topic. So I'm going to try to keep my questions pretty specific here. Um, when you see somebody where these tests are off, do you prioritize certain things? Let's say all five, bullets that you mentioned, all of them are off. Where would you start? Why would you start there?
I usually start with oxygen delivery, to be honest with you, because that's something that I've seen be pretty tanked in most folks when it comes to this world. But it's not just about looking at iron levels, right? Like iron, ferritin, TIBC, all that stuff. We don't just look at that. I'm also looking at CO2. I'm looking at acidosis, etc. If we can get oxygen delivery better, then we can typically perform better at our job and recover better. So that's number one. Number two, I'd probably go with gut health, to be honest. Like if we don't have good gut health, we probably aren't absorbing our nutrients. Somebody rang a doorbell. So yeah, like if you don't have good digestion, we have to remember that it's not just about, you know, eating your vegetables, but if you can't absorb the food that you're eating, then it's useless. So I look at gut health. That's a big part. I'll look at glucose tolerance as well. So if your fasting glucose is 97, we are going to start periodizing your carb intake based on your shift schedule. So your first day off shift, probably going to put you a little bit more towards that keto realm because you haven't slept in, you know, 1-2 days, depending on if you work the Kelly shift or 48 on, 96 off, whatever. But I'll basically make you go kind of keto the first day and then titrate carbs and protein up throughout your days off. And then if your glucose tolerance is great, fructosamine is great, and your A1Cs are fantastic and all that stuff, I might not have to do that necessarily. So it just kind of comes down to the human, but I'll typically periodize carbs and protein in some form or fashion for my folks that are shift workers like that.
Okay. When you start to make these changes, do they start to feel better fairly quickly? Like, will they notice a difference initially, or is it kind of just a long term?
No, it should feel like a significant improvement within 72 hours, to be
Wow.
honest.
Okay.
When I run labs on folks and I write out nutrition protocols for them, I'll 99% of the time get a message within 72 hours. They're like, dude, I don't know if this is placebo or not, but I can't believe how much better I feel. I just talked to a guy yesterday and he was like, hey man, so I started all this stuff up 2 days ago and all the nutrition stuff. And yeah, I haven't had diarrhea since. And I slept through the night and I feel fantastic. It's like, yeah, that's actually how you should feel. You've been living with this weight vest for years. So
Mm-hmm.
it should be fast. I mean, within 72 to 96 hours, we should feel it. If not, then I need to either correct something or we need to figure out if like there's something deeper there and it warrants like a higher level investigation. And most of the time it's just like, oh yeah, I totally missed the boat on that thing. But I've done it enough times now over the last 10, 12 years. It's like, we don't have good results in 72 hours, then something is amiss.
Okay. Two-part question to finish up the nutrition piece. First part, for the person, again, not working with you yet, right? Um, what should they look at if they don't necessarily have access to testing or don't know how to look at a test? Like, what should they do now to have some level of awareness on this?
Yeah, so I actually am not a fan of testing everybody because one, it's just time consuming, it's expensive. The testing should be done when you're stumped. So if I'm sitting there scratching my head like, oh man, I can't figure this out. Okay, let's look deeper. But otherwise, the basics, you know, chew your food. And there's no specific number. I've said 25 in the past, I've said 30. I honestly think if you're going to give a number of chews, you're missing the boat. Like 25 chews, no, that's going to cause neuroses, and that's silly. Just put your fork down. Simple. Take a bite, put your fork down, talk with your mouth full, eat with people, have fun, and just put your fork down. Do that, and you're going to find yourself feeling better. Digestion is one of the most energy expensive processes in the body. The parietal cells need a lot of energy. And so if we're not digesting mechanically with our teeth, we're tanking ourselves. After that, vegetables, right? Don't do raw vegetables. I'm not a fan of raw veggies for most folks. In fact, I almost always see people that eat nothing but raw veggies show up with very low white blood cells. And we call that basically like a leukocytic autodigestion. So white blood cells are helping break down food. And I see that all the time in the raw food people, especially in like a first responder tactical world. So I just tell people, hey, cook your vegetables and eat them, like eat a ton. I've known guys and gals that'll eat 1 to 2 pounds of plant matter a day. And there's a lot of good stuff that comes from that. I mean, we're talking fiber for the microbiome, micronutrients, phytonutrients, etc. But really try to get 10 shades a day. And I actually make that a very specific rule. because we did have research that came out a while back that showed that there was a significant decrease in all-cause mortality when we go from 6 to 10 shades. Because I used to just tell people like 5 or 6 per day, but then Dr. Tom, one of my mentors, kind of illustrated that for me years ago. And I was like, oh, that's a really good study. So I just go with 10. And the way I describe that is 10 shades: broccoli, kale, asparagus, Brussels sprouts, and avocado. Those are all green, but they're 5 shades of green. So we're not trying to get like Roy G. Biv, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. We're not trying to do that, but we're just trying to get in 10 different shades. So I like my reds, I like my yellows, I like my greens. And then for most folks, I tell them maybe 2 shades or 3 shades of those can come from fruit. The rest of it should come from more of like plant matter. And sweet potato, I'd count that as a shade as well, but not white potatoes because they're not really nutrient dense. But that doesn't mean you don't eat them. If you need 400 grams of carbs a day, you're not getting that from broccoli. So rice and potatoes are huge for that. Lastly, I would tell people 60% of their body weight in water per day. So in ounces, I should say. So if you weigh 100 pounds, 60 ounces, 200 pounds, 120 ounces. And then if you're European, or if you're anyone else in the world that uses liters except America, then just Google that.
Do the math.
Yeah. I'm not going to just figure out your kilograms into pounds and then pounds into ounces and the liters. But otherwise, those are my 3 top rules. Put your fork down, 10 shades, 60%. You do those, you should start feeling better. And then a 4th rule, I would say you can use the precision nutrition eyeball method. So men, 2 palms of protein, 2 thumbs of fat, 2 fistfuls of veggies, and 2 scoops or handfuls of carbs per meal. That's pretty good. And then women just have that. So typically a larger human has a larger hand, so their palm is bigger, so they get more protein. And that's a pretty decent way to do it. And you can look up precision nutrition eyeball. That's a great way to do it, especially for those who work a station or a shift where macros isn't necessarily possible.
Gotcha. You actually answered my second part of the question, so I'm not going to ask it. And I think, do you have any kind of last pieces you want to hit? Because otherwise, I think this was fantastic.
No, I would just say if you feel like you're stuck, it's really easy to not progress, and it's because we don't know what we don't know. So you always want to like have data drive your decisions in fitness. The mortality of firefighters and paramedics and cops like right after they retire is super high. So I definitely have a very, very big soft spot in my heart for those kind of guys and gals. And I can't recommend enough that they have somebody as some form of a coach or consultant that can at least look at stuff and be like, hey, like it's not a problem right now, but in 12 years, you're going to have some issues. And that's probably something we should nip in the butt now. So the way I would word it, your check engine light's on, don't wait till your engine makes a funny noise to take it in. Like the second the check engine light's on, go get it checked out, and then make sure you get your oil changes and stuff like that with your car. It's the same thing. Blood work every 6 to 12 months. Just do check-ins, make sure stuff is going great, and then try to preemptively fix stuff before it really breaks down.
Perfect. Michael, this was fantastic, man. I really appreciate you coming on. I think this is going to help a lot of people a lot. If anybody wants to chat with Michael, what's your Instagram? What's your email, man?
Instagram is @coach_Michael_Bann, BANN. Email is michaelbann@thebigdogs.com. It's probably easier just to DM me, slide into my DMs.
Yeah.
I don't check email very often, to be honest with you. So Instagram is probably the best way.
Cool. Thanks, man. I appreciate it. And we'll see everybody next time.
Cheers.